I'm director of Stanford Global Studies, which is a division, as you probably all know, of the School of Humanities and Sciences, and includes some 12 or 13 now programs, both in international affairs, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, and in area studies, a series of area studies centers. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight and introduce you to Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, an Academy Award winner, an Emmy Award winner, a documentary filmmaker of some note who works on problems of human rights, women's issues, primarily in the Islamic world, but really all over. Sharmeen has made, as you've seen already, some 20 films, most of them award-winning films. Most recently, she just won her second Academy Award in the category of Best Documentary Shorts. This is A Girl in the River, The Price of Forgiveness. I hope some of you have seen it. Also a superb film that I will never forget is Saving Face, which was about, these acid burnings of women. This last piece, A Girl in the River, examines the practice of honor killings in Pakistan. And after watching the film, Pakistan's Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, vowed to take action to end that practice. Sharmeen is an alumna of both the International Policy Studies program, 2003, and the Communications program, 2004. She has masters from both programs. Having her here to speak, I have to say, is a special personal pleasure for me, since I was director of the IPS program when she was here, and there's nothing that warms the cockles of an old professor's heart more than to see a student like Sharmeen have such wonderful success on something she always wanted to do when she was here. She talked about how she wanted to make films that influenced people and could change the world, and also to have a friend return to Stanford as well. Sharmeen's work reflects everything we try to emphasize at SGS, and that is intellectual honesty, deep knowledge, accomplishment, both understanding the world as it is while at the same time, when possible, trying to improve it. So it's a huge privilege, an honor, personal pleasure to introduce to you Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy. Sharmeen.
Good evening, everyone. Let me take you back a few steps to tell you how Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy got here. I was born and raised in Pakistan, and when I think about 10 or 12 years old, I found myself to be quite angry about a lot of things. I would drive to school, and I would look outside the window, and I would see other children looking inwards at me, barefoot, begging. And I would ask myself, why is it that I'm the one sitting in the car going to school and they're the ones on the outside? And I would start asking difficult questions in school. And my mother, at that young age, very wise, turned to me and said, I think you should channel this anger towards something more proactive. And so thus began my first journalism experience, which was at the age of 14. And the newspaper that I began writing for, which was the Dawn newspaper in Pakistan, it was the largest English language newspaper, my editor didn't even know how old I was. I would write the articles and mail them, and they would get printed. And when I was 17, I got my first very big break. I was asked, I had written in and said I wanted to start doing investigative pieces. And at that time, my editor really did think I was about 20 years old. And so he assigned me this very difficult piece, which was looking at children of feudal lords. So Pakistan is an agrarian country, and it has people who own large pieces of land, and they feel self-entitled that apart from owning these large pieces of land, that their children have this sense of self-entitlement. So at that time, which was about 1996, these children, they were teenagers, would drive around in cities terrorizing other children, so teenagers, an extreme form of bullying. And so I went undercover and I wrote this piece and I named and shamed people. And I'll never forget the day this article appeared. So it appeared on the morning of what is a Muslim holiday, Eid. So everything was shut. And my father had gone off to say his prayers. And he returned very soon afterwards. And I could hear his voice. This is a very tall man with this heavy voice, deeply protective of the 5 daughters he had. And I could hear his voice booming through the house. And he said, "What have you gone and done now?" And I was petrified. I was like, oh, I don't know what I've gone and done. And he said, "They have spray painted your name with profanities across our gate, across the neighborhood, and across my route to the mosque. What they wanted to do was shame me, because in the conservative society we lived in, that would mean that I would stop talking." But something my father said to me that day has always stayed with me, and I believe was my life's very first, very important lesson, which was, if you speak the truth, I will stand with you, and so will the world. And like any good father, he went out, found the first shop that was open, bought a paint can, and got a number of people together and whitewashed the walls. And so at a very young age, I had found a supporter. And I knew that I could go out and speak about things, and I could go and shake the status quo, and there would be someone who would literally have my back. And thus began my journey to be the filmmaker. I left Pakistan to go off to Smith College, and by that time I was already talking about issues that was making people deeply uncomfortable. And I went off to Smith after going on a hunger strike. My father didn't want me to go to college. He wanted me to go to college in Pakistan. And I didn't want to have any of it. So I failed all the entrance exams in Pakistan at college. Because, I figured if I fail them and I don't go to college, he has to find a way to send me abroad. And the trick worked. I got into one of the worst colleges, and I attended it, got a straight 4.0 GPA, and then I applied secretly to what I knew he would let me go to, an all-women's college. So I applied to all the all-women's college in the US. And I got in. And I remember the day that I went to him and I said I'd gotten into college. And he said, "That's great, but you're not going." Life's second lesson. Never underestimate what a daughter can do to a father. I went on a hunger strike. 48 hours later, the hunger strike translated into me going to college. And I think that the perseverance that I had at a young age paid off. So I was at Smith, and I was still writing for newspapers and writing about issues in Pakistan and Afghanistan for US papers. And when I was a senior, 9/11 happened. And that really did change me and the way I saw the world, and it changed what I wanted to do. When I was a senior at Smith College, I thought about joining the UN. I was writing for newspapers. And then when 9/11 happened, I thought about, I straddled 2 worlds. I was born and raised in Pakistan, but was fortunate enough to go to college in the US. So why don't I take what I know about both the worlds and find a way to do something that would connect 2 worlds? And that's when, with an economics and political science undergraduate degree, I decided to become a documentary filmmaker with absolutely no experience with filmmaking. Life's lesson number 3, you never know where life is going to take you, but the degrees that you have always help in whichever way. So as a filmmaker, I have been able to use my economics and political science, my international policy studies, and my communication degrees to become who I am today. I wrote up this proposal. I had gone back home in 2001 in December, and the first thing that had hit me coming back home after 9/11 was the sheer number of Afghan refugee children that were on the streets of Pakistan. And we were talking, this is a time when everyone is talking about Afghanistan and Pakistan. All of these people have no idea about that part of the world, are being parachuted in to report the news. And I think that war was being looked upon in the US as war, not as people and things that were happening. And I wanted to put a face to the Afghan people and to what was happening. And so I chose to tell the story about Afghan refugee children on the streets of Pakistan and whose parents had sent them off because of the war that was going on. And I remember writing this proposal and sending it off literally to 80 organizations in the US. And I remember the number 80 because when I finished my 80th application, I was like, there's got to be someone out there that wants to fund me. Some people were polite. I was 22 with a Pakistani passport, no degree in filmmaking. Some people wrote back, others didn't. But that didn't stop me. I was convinced that my calling was documentary films, and I had researched it enough online and figured out what a documentary film was and watched enough of them by that time that I thought I had self-taught myself. So somebody out there would give me funding. And just around that time, I had applied to Stanford for a master's program, thinking that I would have eventually gone on the UN route. And when the 80th rejection came back to me, I said, well, got to have plan B. And so I, one morning, woke up and I was reading something, and it said that the New York Times had set up a television unit. So I found the president of New York Times email address, and off I emailed him. And 15 minutes later, he replied and said, send me a proposal. And I did. And 15 minutes later, I got an email that said, can you come to New York and meet with me? So I bought my first suit, got on an Amtrak train, off I went to New York, and I entered this room with the average age significantly higher than mine. And I pitched to them that I wanted to make this film. I didn't know how, but I wanted to, and I had all my photographs up, and I was very, very prepared. And they did. They funded my first film. They trained me, and off I went to Pakistan to make my very first film. When I was out on the field looking at these children, I was thinking about everything that I learned about war in textbooks. But nothing really had prepared me to hear a 10-year-old child who was sleeping on the streets, whose parents were living in Afghanistan, who was earning money and sending it back. And there comes a time when you think about textbooks and what you learn, and when you're out in the field and you meet the people and you see the reality, and then war really becomes much more than textbooks. It becomes a reality. And I filmed for the first 45 days, and I sent my work back to the Times, and I got this frantic call from my producer, and she said, there is no sound on any of these tapes. And I thought, wow, the career's ended even before it started. And so I went back to the drawing board, restarted the film. I finished that film just before I came to Stanford. And the irony was that that film won an Overseas Press Club award, and I beat a very seasoned New York Times journalist on it. And that's how my career in documentary film began. Self-teaching, knocking on many doors, and kicking one open for myself. When I arrived here at Stanford, I had a very strange life because I was working for the New York Times while I was in the IPS. So I would attend college, and almost every weekend, the New York Times would bring me back to New York to train me for other projects. I made my second and my third film while I was doing my master's here, and it was quite a busy time. It was just around that time when I began feeling that I wanted to expand my horizon. I was working out of Pakistan and Afghanistan, but really I had a degree that had pretty much showed me that human beings around the world have the same wants and needs, and all issues are pretty much the same, especially issues confronting women. And that's when I really realized that film could become a tool for advocacy. I remember the first time I thought that a film of mine had an impact was in 2006. I went to the Philippines and I did a film about access to contraceptives. The government in Manila had restricted the sale of contraceptives to women, and it had led to an increase in backstreet abortions that had taken place. And we had gone undercover to film much of this. It was my first time going as an undercover journalist, literally with cameras to film backstreet abortions. And when the film came out, the local health reproductive groups in the Philippines began to use that film as a film to rally the government to change the law. And the film then galvanized a lot of people in Manila. And a few years later, access to contraceptives in certain areas became more easier. And I remember an email that was written to me by an organization called Likan, which is who I had worked with, who had worked for years to get women access to contraceptives. And she said that your film has managed to convince a number of stakeholders that in order to avoid backstreet abortions, they must start providing some sort of contraceptives to government clinics. And that was my first time really understanding that film could be used. A product that I made could be used by others to influence their spheres. I started looking at the issues that would confront women especially, and thus began my journey to talk about some issues that have made me a very polarizing figure in the country that I come from. So for becoming a documentary filmmaker that shakes the status quo, it's quite a lonely job sometimes. And it's lonely because in 2016, if you speak to a number of successful women that push the envelope, they will say that there is a lot of misogyny that exists online. And that misogyny is translated into a lot of hate. And sometimes one starts to wonder and doubt one's own work and think about whether the work that you are doing, for example, in 2012, I did a film, Saving Face, which was about acid violence. The film really did shake Pakistan to the core because acid violence is an issue that would barely ever get reported in the press. Off went me winning an Academy Award, and suddenly it was front page newspaper. And it made a lot of people uncomfortable. That was not a side of Pakistan that they wanted to be shown. And so began this relentless online campaign against me that came from all quarters. And as a documentary filmmaker, I mean, we're not millionaires. Then you begin to question the work that you do and whether it's all worth it. Because one of the unfortunate things about living in the part of the world that I am in is that when you speak out, you're often silenced. And I, in the last couple of years, know several colleagues of mine who've been brutally gunned down. 10 years ago, if you asked me, when a woman shakes the status quo, what happens to her? And I would say very little. But now I would say that she would end up in a body bag. So when I made Saving Face, one of the most interesting things that happened was that Punjab government, which is a populous province in Pakistan, which is where acid violence took place most, started expediting cases of acid violence through anti-terrorism courts, which meant that women who normally would not have filed cases began filing them because they started getting speedy justice. And I remember when that happened, I knew instantly that it was the film that had done it because the film had gotten the whole country to talk about acid violence. So while there had been a campaign to malign me, there had also been wonderful things that had come out of it. And so I decided at that point that I would begin looking at not only the issues that confront people, but also the people who are change makers. You know, the world in this 24-hour news cycle is fatigued by the issues. There are so many issues that confront all of us. And I started looking at people who fight for those issues and started exploring from their point of view how the issues would, so that each film would have a sense of hope that despite the magnitude of the issue, there were people on the front lines who were working on those issues. So I found a young woman in Pakistan who was educating 1,200 kids in a 3-room school in Karachi. The school would close down when it would rain because the roof would come caving in. And the first time I met her, she said she had a dream. And her dream was to open a school that would open up the world to the children. She said, in her words, she said, I want a school that the rich kids go to for my poor kids. And that was her dream. And I remember making that film and thinking, well, how could we make this happen? So as all good filmmakers who have access can do, I sent that film off to Madonna. And she got hold of the film and had this massive concert in London. And I remember bringing this young woman onto stage in front of 65,000 people, where she pledged and asked everyone out there to help build this young woman's school. By the end of the concert, they had raised enough money to not only build the school, but to have the school fully equipped. So I found myself not only being a filmmaker after winning my first Academy Award, but becoming an enabler, somebody who could use my voice to amplify the voices of all of these other people, and then allow them to become spheres of change in their own communities. When this school was constructed, and now it's been 3 years, and the students started going through it, I could see a visible change in that community. So what that young woman had started off, we had helped her get to the next stage. And I thought that then became my calling, which was not only to make films and to try and push the envelope, but to try and amplify the voices of all those people whose voices needed to be amplified and who didn't know how to do it. That same year, we began working with somebody who was working on water and desalinization, and working in communities where water was scarce. And we began lobbying the government, we began lobbying international donors, and we were able to help him set up a plant that sustained a couple of villages. So as a filmmaker, I think that my job then became not only about making films, but then became about finding all of these people. And so my company now routinely goes out and scouts people, not only in Pakistan, but outside Pakistan as well. And we make films that connect people and connect worlds. Recently, I spent 2 years in Haiti and Bangladesh. I stumbled upon this story. I've been reading in the newspaper and watching the news for the last few years, and really seen Muslim women being depicted in a particular light. And I thought to myself, I need to find a story that really shatters the stereotypes that people have about Muslim women. And I read about Bangladesh having the world's first all-women, all-Muslim peacekeeping unit. Women who go off to Haiti and Congo all by themselves and serve over there. So I embedded myself with the Bangladeshi women, 350 of them, as they trained. They are a unit that do everything from driving, cooking, to patrolling, riot police, and they work as a unit, and followed them to Haiti in a particularly volatile time, and saw how these women then left behind their families. There's a particularly poignant scene in the film where many of us who watch the news are very used to seeing men go off to war, where a man goes off to war and the woman is standing back holding the babies. And for the first time, I saw hundreds of women going off and the men standing holding the babies. And that to me was the strongest image that I could ever see, that even in a Muslim country, in a deeply conservative Muslim country, the roles could be reversed. And for the 2 years, we followed the men. And the thing that I learned was that the men respected the women so much more when they came back, because they knew what it felt like to work, take care of the children, and juggle both of those. And it changed the family dynamics. And that film, which has just been released now and will be on PBS very soon, shows that nothing is stagnant, that roles and societies can adapt and change if you allow them to, if the men give women the space. Even in a deeply patriarchal and religious society, those roles can easily be reversed. And that's what I saw when I was in Bangladesh. In the last 2 years, working on A Girl in the River, I remember that I wanted to do a film about honor killings because it bothered me. It bothered me that in this modern day and age, culture and religion is being manipulated to kill women, not only in Pakistan, in India, in Canada, there have been instances of honor killings. In the UK, one of the most staggering statistics that I came across was that in a 5-year period, there were 11,000 honor crimes committed, not killings, but honor crimes related to honor killings reported in the UK in immigrant communities. So it's an issue that affects a lot of people. But somehow, I always felt that people got away with it because they put it under the guise of culture and religion. And that's something that I find that when people are afraid to take on issues and they think that that happens to those people and in that set of circumstances, and that's what their culture is. There is no culture that says that it is okay to kill a woman. There is no religion that says that it is okay to kill a woman. It is society that enables that. When I began working on that film, I wanted to find a survivor. It's very hard to find survivors of honor killings because if you survive, they come back and kill you again. And so I began working on the film, and very soon afterwards, I had to stop because the first time I started, the young woman that I wanted to profile died. And one morning, I was reading in the newspaper that a young woman had been shot and thrown in a river in what appeared to be an apparent honor killing. And that's when I said, well, we need to find this young woman. And so we went off to the hospital. And the first thing that hit me about this young woman was that she had only been to school till grade 5, but she was wiser beyond her years, that she had this determination in her to fight. And she wanted her story to become an example. And I also saw the men around her, the men who supported her. There was a lawyer who supported her, police officer that supported her. There was rescue officers and the doctor who saved her life. So I looked at this narrative because oftentimes men are demonized in our part of the world, and I wanted to talk also about the men who support women. Because really, in many parts of the world, women cannot go forward if the men do not support them. And so this film for me was unique because it showed that what happens when men support women and also when men don't support women. So her own father and uncle had tried to kill her because she had defied them and wanted to get married out of her own choice. And all of these other men had helped her. But while making that film, I realized that everything was stacked against her. And it made me realize how lucky I was. I was born in the same country as this young woman. I had an education and I was empowered. And this young woman wanted to be empowered. She wanted to fight the system, but the system had let her down considerably. So she found herself, through the course of the film, forgiving the father and the uncle who had wanted to kill her. I knew that that film would have an enormous backlash, again, because it was made by a woman and because I was talking about issues that people didn't want to talk about. But something happened which was wonderful along the way. The film got nominated for an Academy Award, and the Prime Minister of Pakistan then decided that he wanted to screen the film at the Prime Minister's Secretariat. And many people have asked me how I got the Prime Minister to sit through 40 minutes of a documentary film. This is a Prime Minister who has never watched a film in public before. And I thought it was a remarkable gesture to be made by a sitting Prime Minister because it showed that the voice that I had and the voice that I amplified had somehow reached him. And that was the power of film for me. And we had the first screening at the Prime Minister's house. He asked all the right questions. And we were lobbying to get this law passed. The law as it currently stands is that in cases of honor killings, there is a right of forgiveness, so you can forgive. However, the law is very manipulated because when a father kills his daughter, his wife can forgive him. If a brother kills his sister, his parents can forgive. So it's within the four walls of the home. So if somebody actually even dares to go and file a report, in most cases, the dead body is not even found. After he watched the film, he said that he would work on changing the law, and he made a very powerful statement in a country like Pakistan, which was, there is no honor in honor killing. And that statement really did go viral. And that's when I realized, okay, well, this is great. The Prime Minister is going to change the law. My work is done. And then the film won the Academy Award. And since then, reality has really hit, because while all the political parties would like to pass the law and have signed on to it, the religious political parties don't want the law to be passed. And before I flew to Stanford, I showed the film to a number of parliamentarians and senators and really lobbied with them. And most of them have agreed, except for the religious political parties. And then that's when you realize as a filmmaker that you hit this block. So what is the next step, and what should I do? And I've been thinking about it. Well, I won the Academy Award, but how is that going to translate into actually getting this law passed and making sure that there are no more sabas and none of that happens anymore? And so we've come up with a unique strategy where, as soon as I go back from here, we are going to take the film to the religious political parties. They are the only ones who have not seen the film. We have found a way to get to them. And I will sit down and make them watch the film, and then bring Islamic jurisprudence lawyers and have a sane conversation about why they think this law should not pass. I don't think that I would have had that strategy had I not had this background of studying international relations, communication, kind of coming with a background that's very different from a filmmaker's background. And so we're hopeful that this law is going to change. But along the way, what has happened is that another campaign has started, both against me and my work. And so a few days ago, before I left for the US, I had a serious talk with a number of people that I work with about whether we should continue doing the work we do. And then something happened, which was a young woman who we had been working with and advising her on what she should do. She had been somebody who had been in one of our films, wrote to us and implored us to continue doing the work that we're doing with honor killings. And that's when I realized that there can be many voices that try and silence you, but there needs to be that one voice of support that keeps you going on. And so for me right now, the most important lesson is to continue fighting. Most people ask me, why do you continue to live in Pakistan? And I say that people like myself need to live in that country and need to push the envelope and need to try and create spheres of change so that we do see the country moving forward. It is not always an easy job, but one I know that will affect change, as we're already beginning to see with our work. Thank you so much.
And the question I had was one we already asked Sharmeen a zillion questions at the table, but this was one that we didn't ask that I'd like to ask, that I thought about, and this has to do with documentary filmmaking in general and truth-telling and artistic license. In other words, where in documentary film, I mean, this last film, right, was a very kind of clipped and well done story, like you said, in 40 minutes or so, right? And it was storytelling of the best sort. You always knew where you were. You knew what was happening in the story. You know, how much of that is your creative license? I mean, and in having creative license, doesn't the documentary filmmaker sometimes run into the problem of truth-telling? So that's the question.
So the genre of documentary filmmaking has evolved considerably, depending on the filmmaker that you asked. This year, for example, the Academy Award nominated documentary films included a film that was completely animated, but had the voice was of the people who had actually gone through the experiences. There is a very famous documentary film that's been done called The Look of Silence, about Indonesia and the genocide, and they've been using techniques that are very new and innovative. So the field of documentary filmmaking, I feel, has expanded exponentially, and what is considered to be true documentary films in the last couple of years. as a filmmaker, you never really know where if you're following a story, you never really know what the outcome would be. In this particular film, I'm glad that the 40 minutes look like it's all crisp and clean, but we had about 80 hours of footage. And we were literally embedded with the family for months. I think there was a time when literally they stopped picking up our phones because they were like, we cannot deal with these filmmakers anymore. And so when you're trying to tell that story, for me, it's like, in what time span will the audience connect to it? How long can I hold their attention, especially in a foreign language film with subtitles? In this particular film, one of the most challenging things was there were so many players, and each player had a different point of view, and how do you allow them each to articulate that enough so it resonates with the people who are watching the film. So when we finished filming the 80 hours, it took us 4 months to go through the footage and whittle it down to 40 minutes.
Thank you. So I invite you to the microphones to ask questions. Yes, go ahead. Why don't you identify yourself and the program you're with? Yeah.
All right. Hi, I'm an undergrad in economics and public policy. I went to Sharmeen's high school in Pakistan. I have a couple of questions. The first question is about how do you sustain sort of interest in an issue 3 or 4 years after a film has been done? So if you can speak a bit about your engagement with the issue of acid victims in Pakistan and sustaining that after the hype has gone down, people have forgotten about the issue. So that's one question I have. And the second one is, in a country where laws mean one thing but practice means another, how do you ensure that laws passed, they can be symbolic, they can reflect some sort of advance, but when it comes to the actual practice and implementation of this, after the law has been passed, how do you think about your role there? So,
Okay.
yeah.
So if you ask any documentary filmmaker, especially who's a social justice documentary filmmaker and who works on many different films, about issues that they make films about, I think that their connection to those subjects stay forever, but obviously their level of advocacy with those subjects diminishes as they move on to other films. With me and acid violence in Pakistan, I have worked and continue to work with organizations on the ground who are working on acid violence. There is an international organization which is an Acid Survivors Trust International. So they have fundraisers, they have advocacy, and I often lend the film or lend my voice to that. It's been about 4 years since the film has come out, so my role in acid violence has been reduced now to lending my voice to the subject and using the film as a tool. So whoever wants to screen the film and the message of the film, that's something that I support, and that's how I work with. Filmmakers move from subject to subject. It becomes very hard to stay with that one subject for a long period of time. One thing that we did with acid violence is we created a campaign that had public service announcements, that had materials that we had designed, and those materials have been disseminated to the organizations that are working on the ground. I do think that, yes, laws are symbolic in a country like Pakistan unless you change mindsets. But with honor killings, particularly, it is an important law for us to pass, because right now what happens is that people literally get away with murder. And because people get away with murder, you find that you can go into communities and people don't think that killing a woman is a big deal, because they know 2 or 3 or 4 men who have killed somebody in their family and who have not gone to jail because of the loophole that exists in the law right now. So the very first thing, particularly in this case for me, is to try and get this law passed so that people start going to jail. When enough people go to jail, people will begin to realize this is a serious crime. I could end up behind bars for the rest of my life. But until that happens, just like in the film, people are going to think this is a heroic thing to do because they're not getting punished for it. And so in this particular case, I think it's very important to pass the law, but then also to use the film as a tool, because essentially as I like to tell people, filmmakers are not magicians, and we can't, kind of wave our magic wand and have this, the subject and kind of go away, is that we screen the film and start facilitated dialogue. So with this film, in the last 1 month, we've had 50 screenings across Pakistan. 50 more screenings are starting as of next week. And so facilitated dialogue will hopefully lead to some sort of change. But unless we start sending people to prison, unless people begin to realize that killing a woman is a heinous crime and it has nothing to do with religion and culture, that's when I think that we'll be taking the first step towards achieving some sort of change.
Questions? Yeah.
Hi, Sharmeen. My name is David Lee. I'm in the International Policy Studies program. And after IPS, I'm actually doing a 1-year documentary film training conservatory. So you're a great role model to follow, so thank you. And thank you for coming today. My question is, people say the movie is made in the editing room floor. So can you tell us about kind of do you have any type of way you edit? How do you come across, with all these interviews you have, how do you kind of make a cohesive and wonderful film that you made? And second, I was just wondering, can you give us an update on Saba, the main character in your most recent film?
Sure. So filmmakers are like mad scientists, okay? When we're done with our 80 hours of filming, my office has these big softboards everywhere with these notepads and kind of post-its on it. And each post-it indicates a film experience that we had. So, for example, the day, if we're looking at this particular film, but the day the young woman went into hospital, the day she was released from hospital, the day she decided to fight her case, the day she decided to not fight her case, the lawyer that helped her, the interview with the doctor, and all of these kind of mad posters that are up. And then begin the time of sifting through the footage and through each one of those notes and finding that one moment on that particular day. And then assembling all those moments together first to see if they make any coherent sense. And then kind of whittling it down from that. And then finding touch points. So how can I best articulate that moment where you see, for example, in Saba's case, how she changed her mind. There was that particular moment, I remember that one day when she was having a conversation with her brother-in-law, and he said, well, we have to forgive them. And she looked down and she said, do whatever you want to do. And that moment was the moment of change from the fighter to kind of somebody who had given into the system. So you have to find those moments within all of that, then construct that. So I do really think that especially documentary films are made in the edit room. I'm one of those believers. And I think having an excellent editor is something very important. So Saba gave birth to a baby boy. She is pregnant again. Since the film was nominated for an Academy Award, we had a donor that came forward and donated a piece of land to her. Another donor has come forward to build a house for her. Another donor has come forward and given money to her and her mother. And a number of other donors have come forward. She didn't have a birth certificate or a national identity card, and they have worked to get her those documents. Statistics tell us that survivors of honor killings are killed again. There are attempts to make sure that they are killed. So Saba is quite brave, and she's been speaking out. But we have protected her as much as we can, and we have advised her not to go out into the media, and not, her whole thing was she wanted her story told because she wanted what had happened to her not to happen to anyone else. And that job has already been done because she's already created something that has allowed us to use as an advocacy tool. And our advice now to her is to lay low, especially because she's pregnant, and try and kind of stay out of the limelight. And I think that she is busy supervising the building of her home these days, and quite happy with that.
Hi, Sharmeen, thank you so much for coming. I'm Radhika. I'm an international policy studies student as well. My question to you is, I saw your TED talk on Al Qaeda and how these are, they recruit young children and teach them and preach them into joining the terrorist groups. So my question is that when you go to such risky places and do you feel a threat to your life, and like how do you justify that to your family, and has there been any instance that you'd like to share with us that has been very moving or that stirred you in a way that you thought maybe I can't do this anymore, and then what inspired you next?
So I think that the reason that I'm alive so far is because I'm a woman. If I was a man by now, and the kind of issues that I have, especially pre-making films about women, I made a lot of films about terrorists before I began making films about women. And so I touched on a lot of issues and interviewed a lot of very bad people. You know, there have been a couple of instances in my life where I feel like I've cheated death. One in particular was in 2009, 2008, I was in Swat, which is a valley in Pakistan, which had been taken over by the Taliban. And I was making a film about schools that had been blown up by the Taliban. I mean, one of the first things that they did when they entered this valley was blow up the schools, both for boys and for girls. And I was in a school with two girls, a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they were talking to us about what they missed most about school. And I was interviewing over there. It was a PBS Frontline film, and my cameraman was standing there, and suddenly I saw two men standing behind my cameraman, and I'm interviewing, and I'm nervously looking over my shoulder because I'm thinking, oh, I really don't want to say anything. These two young girls are standing here. I don't want to appear. And then I could hear mortar sounds outside, so active fighting had begun right outside the school I was at. And it was two members of the Taliban who had come up to my cameraman and had said, if you're not out of here in 5 minutes, I don't think you'll make it out. And I don't think I've ever run as fast as I have that day, because I was responsible for those two young girls that were in school as well. But we didn't know where to go, because it wasn't something that we had planned. We had been told that that area had been cleared. And suddenly, so we literally ran out, got into the car, started driving. There were bullets flying pretty much everywhere, and we took refuge in the girls' house, in the two young girls' house, and we stayed there for a few hours. But that was a time when I really thought that not only myself, but the crew that I was with would have been harmed. That was my last film with the Taliban, and very soon afterwards I had a baby, and then I stopped making films about terrorists. I think that when you're younger, you have a lot more kind of energy in you to, and there is this romantic notion about war and war journalism. There's nothing romantic about it at all, let me tell you, having been on the front lines of a few wars, including Iraq and Afghanistan. I think I realized that the filmmaker that I wanted to be and the change that I wanted to affect was looking at not war, but at the people who live through that. And that's when I shifted my thing. And also, I think motherhood softened me up a bit. So.
Hi, my name's Thomas. I'm in the history department. I have a couple questions about your voice within your films. So first of all, do you feel like your presence with your subject has ever altered the course that the story has taken? And second, I just watched A Girl in the River, and there were like a few moments where you were reminded as a viewer that there was a camera person and that there was a hand in creating the story. And so how do you decide whether to sort of put your voice in or remove it completely?
So my first 10 or 12 films were all were told from my perspective. I was in all my films. And it was me going into places and finding and exploring those issues. I found that I shaped the story much more when I did that. It was more about my voice and what I was seeing and how I was engaging with things, and less about the people that I was profiling. And so in 2009, I changed the way I began to tell stories. I removed myself completely from the stories, just in terms of I was no longer on camera. I was just behind the camera. And I'd be curious to know. I'd be curious to ask you where, in what points of the film, you thought that there was a camera.
There's one point where a man in front of the courthouse comes out and actually shuts the camera off.
Okay, yeah.
And there was a second time when you're interviewing the father and the uncle where your voice is heard asking questions.
Okay, so that was very deliberate, and it was deliberate because in the first case, I wanted the audience to realize that a woman was asking the questions of this man who and was asking questions. I went up to a certain point in asking questions. It could have gone much further, and I could have been very argumentative, but I didn't want, it wasn't a debate. It was me asking the questions, but I wanted very much for the audience to realize that a woman was asking the questions. And that particular policeman kind of saying no to the camera, that was deliberate because we weren't allowed to film. And as a filmmaker, I wanted to convey to the audience without putting up a card or saying something that we're not allowed to film inside the courtroom. So that's why.
Other questions?
Hello, my name is Lacey, and I am a junior in international relations. Thank you for being here today. I have been thinking about, as you've been talking about how your documentaries have really influenced decision makers and masses, about the intersection of mass culture and documentaries, and how those interplay together, and if you think about that when you're making your films so that you have the desired impact, because that's not necessarily what you're trying to say is not necessarily what's received. So.
Yeah, so with each film, it's a different message and a different kind of outcome that I'm looking for. So with this particular film, I wanted to affect policy change. There are other films that I make that I just want to affect the way the community looks at an issue, or if I just want people to look at that particular issue in a different perspective, or whether if I just want to help the person who I'm making the film about achieve a certain goal. I think every film has a different objective, and I'm doing a number of films in Pakistan that are for local television, and they look at issues that perhaps have no resonance to the outside world, but to Pakistan. And I've recently started an animated film company. I created Pakistan's first animated feature film for children, which became the highest grossing animated film to play in Pakistan, because I wanted to reach out to younger kids and have some sort of social messaging that was guised in entertainment in some way. And that was very successful, and now I'm going on to do a number of films in animation in Pakistan. So it just depends on what the medium is and what I'm trying to achieve through that.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Catherine, and I'm a doctoral student in anthropology, but today I'm with the Center for African Studies. And my question for you is about sort of, that you tell such an incredible story, and you're telling, especially in your most recent film, you're telling a story about a woman. And so it's your story because you're telling it, but it's her story because it's about her. And it is everyone's story because each person who watches it can imagine themselves in that situation. So I wondered if you could speak a bit about that, and also about kind of what reaction you've gotten from Saba when she saw the film. And how did she feel about the way that her story was told, and how does that discussion then happen between filmmaker and subjects?
So, bless you. The very first, when I began making the film with Saba, after a few times that I'd met her, she had almost as many questions for me as I had for her. She would say, so you're educated and you're married and your husband lets you travel. Who takes care of your children? Who gives you permission to travel? Who educated you? She asks about my family dynamics. She asked that, is it possible for women to become anything they want to in cities? So there were so many questions she had. And to be honest, I do think there were two women in the team, myself and my field producer, and she interacted a lot more with my field producer. I made, the entire film was made while I was pregnant. So at some point it was difficult for me to travel to some of the, to her village, so I took care of other parts of the film. And so she saw two very empowered Pakistani women who came from the city of Karachi, very far away, this big city, who would travel and work and could say whatever they want. And she would look at us, and I think that we'd really, in some way, influenced, because at the end of the film, she says she wants a girl, and she wants a girl who's educated, and she wants a girl who wants to work. And I think in some ways she saw what the two of us were able to do. We come from her country, we speak her language, yet we come from a very different part of the country, and our experiences were so different. So I think by asking us questions and interacting with us, she thought about the possibilities that women had and what a woman could do. So the first time we showed Saba, she's seen the film twice now. The first time we showed the film to her was on a laptop in her home, and she watched it with her mother, and they had a running commentary going on between the two of them. And she would watch something on the screen, and she would turn to her mother and be like, they put that in as well, and then the mother would say something. And so it was quite a lovely banter. And actually, we filmed them watching it together, because I wanted to capture that moment for her when she first saw the film. And what she was most disappointed about was that at the end of the film, she said, but you filmed me when I gave birth to my son. Why is that not in the film? And I said to her, well, the film ended, it was just that moment. But she had her own kind of thing. And I remember when she saw her father and her uncle say that she was cursing under her breath. When she saw her sister say what she said, she didn't say anything, but I saw the look on her face. It was kind of a look of betrayal. So she's seen the film. She wants a copy of the film to watch anytime she feels like. She's asked me. The film is not publicly out yet, so she doesn't have a copy yet, but soon she will.
Hi. So I'm Sarah. I'm a student with the International Relations Department. I actually have a question that came up just when you were discussing the dynamic and the relationship between mother, sister, and Saba. I found that really interesting during the movie, the fact that the mother and sister initially, and maybe even continue to be on the side of the uncle and the father in terms of supporting their decision. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about kind of that aspect and the fact that even kind of sister and mother were a part of the rationale.
It's the set of rules that you grew up with. It's your reality. In their reality, when you cross a line, which in their world Saba did because she decided to get married out of her free will, then there has to be repercussions. That is the world that they come from. And that's why I couldn't fault the mother or the sister for thinking that way, because in their world, when there is a punishment, and sometimes that punishment means that you will get shot. That her mother particularly kept telling me, and still today tells me, that what the father did was wrong, but I know why he did it. It kind of is this thing that he had to say. She left us with no choice. Again, that has to do with the mentality. That's the reality that they have known. And it can only change when somebody tells them. It's almost like if if you've only ever known darkness, when you're first introduced to light, you're going to flicker your eyes, you're going to get used to it, it's going to take you a while, but you're not going to know what light looks like if you've always lived in the darkness.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sadaf Jaffer. I'm a postdoc here in Islamic Studies. Thank you so much for being here and for all the important work that you do. My question again is about Girl in the River. I was really moved by the men that you portrayed who were supportive, including the police inspector who, you know, he really did his job. They found the culprits, they put them behind bars, and he really wanted her to pursue this case, as well as the lawyer who was working for her pro bono. And that was especially powerful because I think sometimes the police in Pakistan don't have the best reputation, or there's a sense that nobody's helping, nobody wants to capture these perpetrators. Beyond the, you know, establishing the lack of allowing forgiveness and loopholes, how else do you think that protection could be provided for these women? Is it just that the police are under-resourced? And yeah, if you have any ideas for what steps beyond the actual law being changed that could help these women. Thank you.
Well, I think one of the things that needs to happen is that, I mean, there has to be a re-education of minds. I mean, look, there is a lot of push-pull factor going on in a country like Pakistan, where you have now people have access to cell phones. Internet penetration is becoming more and more in rural and semi-rural areas. Young women especially are beginning to ask for their rights. You know, economics demands that young women begin to work as well. And so they're leaving their homes, they're going out. Whether they're leaving their homes and they're in the low socioeconomic backgrounds and they're domestic staff workers, or they're going into beauty parlors and working, but they're interacting with other women who seem like they have more rights. And they also have a notion of what they want in their life, and especially when they start earning money. And so I think that the re-education of men to happen. As long as men feel like they control women and they have to have a hold on women, you will see that violence against women and the numbers of violence against women will continue to rise. I almost feel like people talk about educating women in Pakistan. I think that really we need to educate the men in Pakistan, as in most countries. I mean, unfortunately, this, you know, in the part of the world that I come from, women have to ask men permission to do a lot of things. There is a sense of he allowed me, or did you ask this one? And so I think that that dynamic is playing out much more in Pakistan now, where you find that young women are demanding. They are saying, no, I want to get married to somebody that I choose, or I want to work and I want to do that. And that means that there is going to be people, especially men, who are going to say, and they are saying, that no, this is not what's allowed in our community or in our family, and then there are retributions for it. So I think that there's a number of things that have started happening, which to me are encouraging. So one of the first things that started to happen is that our advertisements on television for products have started to subtly change. So there's two particularly important campaigns that are running right now. There is an air conditioning unit that has come out with this whole new advertising campaign in which they show that two men are talking to each other about their life insurances. These are very subtle but amazing ways of communicating with people. And one says, well, I use my life insurance to marry my daughter off to this man and get her a grand wedding. And this other man turns and says, well, I use my life insurance to give my daughter an education, and now she's a high-profile working woman. And in a country like Pakistan, using an advertising campaign to deliver that message for an air conditioner is very forward-thinking. You know, somehow it links back to innovative air conditioners. But anyway, but those kind of advertising campaigns, to having them run, is sending a message that there are people within society who are pushing the envelope, who are beginning to think in a certain way, and that gives me hope.
Okay, maybe one more question. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Abdurrahman. I'm here with the African Studies group. Well, in your talk, you say that some of the opposition you're receiving were from religious parties and religious leaders. And also, you said several times when you were talking that, the violence against women has nothing to do with religion. And I'm curious, when you are speaking to your audiences, how do you make, the distinction between, the actions of religious leaders or of religious institution and faith? And especially, today in a world where religion, there's such a strong association between religion and violence. Thank you.
So one thing I think we're all in agreement is that all religions in some way or the other try and control women. Whether it's reproduction rights, whether it's abortion, whether it's all kinds of things. I think that the way I look at stuff is that for me it's all about a power game. In every society there is some level of violence against women, and it is always a power tussle. It is when women demand rights, want something that is not used, that society is not used to giving women. I'm very categorical that it has nothing, the religious leaders, especially in Pakistan, kind of walk the front line when it comes to rights against women, because I feel they have the most to lose. And that's why, and that is the only thing that they harp on about. So if you look at, I always joke about this, but I say that the only thing that the religious parties care about is women. If you put the name woman next to any bill that is supposed to go into parliament, they will stop it. If it's women's protection, they haven't even read it. They would stop it just by simply virtue of having the name woman. They're obsessed with what a woman wears, what a woman is allowed to do, what she should study, where she should work. It's sort of a national obsession. And it's got to do with the religious political parties. Really been trying to understand it, but that's the only thing that they can control. In parliament, in Pakistan, religious political parties control less than 5% of the parliament. It's a very small number. It doesn't translate into votes. Nobody votes the religious political parties into power in Pakistan. The only thing that they control in the country is noise about what a woman should and shouldn't do. And if you were at some point to pick up the newspaper and see what the religious political parties talk about, 99% of the time they're talking about women. So it really has to do with what they feel like they can control. And I think more and more women, as they see in society, in the last 10 years, women are more visible on television, women are more visible in the workplace, more women are going to school, more women are going to college, and they're threatened by that. And they use religion because that's the only thing that they know to say that our religion doesn't allow it. But anyone who's studied the religion, anyone who can make half an articulate argument against them knows that it's got to do with power more than anything else.
Okay, thank you, Sharmeen, for a wonderful evening.